Today, we hope to give you an introduction to the science of El Nino, its effects in California, and some of the updated resources that staff has been working on. Next slide, please. As a refresher, El Nino is often described as an unusual or anomalous warming of the surface ocean in the eastern and central tropical Pacific Ocean. On a map of sea surface temperature anomalies like this one here, El Nino looks like a tongue of warmer water extending progressively along the equator from the coast of South America towards Indonesia. NOAA, the federal government, measures the strength of an El Nino event by the amount of warming in a specific region of the Central Pacific. A strong event is defined as one that produces temperatures more than 1.5 degrees above the long-term average. Next slide, please. Here we go. NOAA's latest projections, which are shown in this graph, indicate around a 66% chance of a strong El Nino happening this winter. The upper range of the projections, and sort of the top of the curve on the right-hand side there, though that's less likely, show there is a potential for a very strong event that matches the largest historical El Ninos from 1983, 1998, and 2016. Scientists at NOAA and other agencies are tracking El Nino very closely, and the projections will narrow as we get closer to the winter season. Next slide, please. Sometimes left out of this basic description is that El Nino is just one phase of a larger natural cycle, the so-called El Nino Southern Oscillation, or ENSO, that involves major shifts in not only the surface ocean temperature, like I just described, but also the deep ocean and the atmosphere across the Pacific. El Nino is the so-called warm phase, with elevated temperatures in the eastern and central Pacific. Its twin, La Niña, has a roughly opposite pattern. And this, this contrast is shown in that left-hand figure there. This ENSO cycle alternates between these phases every 2 to 7 years. It's not a regular pattern. In broader terms, ENSO is a cyclical pattern in ocean heat transfer, both at the surface, which is easier to see in these figures, and at depth in the ocean. And it's linked to and reinforced by changes in prevailing wind directions, ocean currents, sea level, atmospheric circulation, and rainfall patterns spanning the Pacific. Indirectly, ENSO's effects are felt in seasonal weather around the world. The figure on the right tries to illustrate some of these changes between ENSO phases. Probably the most obvious thing in the figure you can see is that this big plume of cloudiness, which represents low pressure and rising air, is shifted towards the Americas, away from Australia and New Zealand during an El Nino event. During an El Nino, the dominant easterly trade winds of the equatorial Pacific weaken and sometimes reverse, allowing warm water from the Western Pacific near Indonesia to kind of slosh back eastward towards South America. And like I said, the dominant zone of low pressure also shifts eastward. Next slide, please. El Nino changes the atmospheric circulation in the North Pacific, and that's most relevant for us. It generally strengthens the subtropical jet stream, and it nudges the winter storm tracks further south. These changes are what have often led to winter storm impacts in California. The very strong El Nino events of 1983 and 1998, in particular, had serious and dramatic impacts in California, including heavy rainfall, flooding, and landslides. Along the coast, these events caused extreme high water levels, intense waves, and severe coastal erosion. I'm now going to let Jeremy take over and tell you more details about the effects of past El Ninos. Thanks.
Thanks, Joe. Next slide. As we've mentioned, El Nino events can lead to increased storminess and wetter than normal conditions for California. As the state experienced earlier this year, a series of relatively strong storms in quick sequence can lead to damaging flooding in creeks, rivers, and local storm drainage networks. Heavy rainfall on recent burn scars can also lead to debris flows and elevated sedimentation downstream. I think we need to go 2 slides. There we go. Heavy rainfall can also destabilize slopes and bluffs. As water infiltrates soils, it can reduce the soil's strength and make soils heavier, causing slides and slope failure. Intense runoff directed towards bluff faces can also cause rapid erosion, as the runoff quickly pulls soils away from the steep, unvegetated slopes. This can cause the rapid formation of gullies and undermine structures too close to the bluff edge. Erosion at the base of bluffs from large waves can also lead to bluff failures, as material at the toe supporting the rest of the bluff is undercut. All of these factors can cause significant erosion events that have happened up and down the coast along or including Pacifica, as shown during the 1998 El Niño winter in this image on the slide. Next slide. Increased storminess in the Pacific can also lead to larger waves hitting the California coast more frequently. Increased wave energy can cause significant coastal erosion, as was observed during the 2016 El Niño event. El Niños can also lead to temporary but still long-lasting increases in sea levels along the California coast. The 2016 El Niño contributed about 8 inches to higher sea levels in California over the course of months. On the screen, you can see an example of what this contribution looked like in terms of the observed water levels in green versus the predicted tides in blue. Here's why that increase to sea level matters. Next slide. The worst wave damage occurs when large swell coincides with high water levels. This happened in Santa Cruz County this past winter when record-breaking waves hit during an almost +6-foot high tide. A photo from that event in Capitola can be seen on the upper right of the slide. With higher water levels, waves break closer to the shore and more wave energy is able to reach coastal areas and contribute to flooding. You can see an example from Venice Beach on the bottom with a photo from 2018 on the left during calm conditions and the damaging 1983 El Niño season on the right from the same vantage point. With the temporary sea level rise created by El Niño, the chances of swell occurring at high enough tides to cause damaging flooding and erosion increases. Next slide. Because of the potentially damaging effects of a significant El Niño winter, it is important to be prepared. As part of statewide efforts to prepare for the coming El Niño, staff updated the Commission's informational webpage on El Niño with relevant information and recent science. Next slide. On the webpage, members of the public and local government staff can find information about what an El Niño event is, a brief overview of the impacts from past El Niño events, and best practices for preparing for storms and heavy rains, including specific preparedness checklists for local governments and shoreline property owners. These checklists include tables noting the dates of significant high tides through the winter season. They also detail preparedness measures, such as inspecting any infrastructure or structures and identifying prudent maintenance activities to minimize potential storm damage. The webpage and checklists also highlight where to contact local district offices about any necessary permits, and where to find more information from sources like NOAA. Staff plans to update the website over the course of the season with the latest information as it becomes available. I'll now hand it back to Joe. Next slide.
Just to end, I think it's worth noting that the current El Niño is developing in a really different climate context than past strong events. As shown in this figure, virtually the entire global ocean is experiencing unusually warm temperatures right now. The emerging El Niño in the Pacific is just one of several regions of fairly extreme marine heat at the moment. We don't really know how layering a strong El Niño over this background could rearrange the regional effects that Jeremy has just described. More broadly, some modeling studies have projected that climate change could amplify the ENSO cycle and produce more extreme El Niños. Probably at this point, the safest prediction is to expect the unexpected. Jeremy and I thank you for your time, and we're happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you so much, Mr. Street and Mr. Smith. Really, not only excellent presentation, but incredibly pertinent presentation. I'm sure there'll be questions and comments from commissioners. Do we have any members of the public who wish to comment?
None for this item.
Oh, okay. Thanks so much. Any questions or comments from commissioners on this item? Yes, Commissioner Escalante.
I just wanted to reflect on this because of the fires that are happening right now, and I find it so difficult to reconcile the fact that we there's a very clear picture right now where the town, I think electricity from the grid is back on since yesterday or this week, but for a week and a half it was just generators, diesel fuel generators. And I was driving past, it was right behind the high school, Del Norte, where there's just a bunch of enormous trucks with generators and then one tanker truck fueling it. And then behind it, all the smoke coming from the mountain. So I found it so hard because obviously I was depending on that electricity. I was without electricity for 5 days. I couldn't take it anymore. So, I don't have the answer. The only thing is sort of an enormous sense of urgency and feeling like we have a lot to lose now if we don't really speed up our action and our transition out of those polluting fuels and into the new world. And not just the fuels, but everything that is causing climate change, because it's not just burning fuels, but it's also the deforestation, the loss of forests across the world, and our overdependence, and we're building bigger things, depending on more steel, needing more cement. All of that has enormous greenhouse gas footprints. So as we are moving forward towards all of this development and all of this growth, we really do need to take into account the greenhouse emission calculations and all of that, and the footprint really has to be as small as possible. And while I'm sitting here in Humboldt, the things that are coming to Humboldt are going to be enormous, especially in this area. So we do need to keep that in mind. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Aguirre.
Thank you. I echo Commissioner Escalante's comments regarding the need to reduce our footprint. That's imperative. And thank you for the presentation. I was wondering about what the compounding factors would be with ENSO and the predicted weather variability related to climate change and the coastal flooding. I recently saw a presentation from Scripps Institution of Oceanography that predicted that we're going to have in San Diego County at least 40 days of coastal flooding by 2030. Right now, it's usually just 1 or 2 days, and that grows exponentially by 2100. We'll have 100 days of coastal flooding, and it actually amplifies, right? So when you have these severe coastal storms, winter storms with king tides and the predicted sea level rise, you have a formula for disaster, frankly. And we see it firsthand in Imperial Beach. We're so low lying that we've seen when those factors combine, and it's devastating to communities, not to mention the environmental justice intersection, right, that I keep talking about, of course, related to sewage. We just had the first ever tropical storm make landfall in San Diego, Tropical Storm Hillary, which brought 2 billion gallons of sewage. And imagine having your streets flooded with sewage contaminated waters and toxic pollutants. So, and as communities continue to be pushed to the coast because of increased temperature in general, it's extremely concerning, to say the least. So thank you for keeping us informed.
Anyone else? I just want to ask a quick question. So I think this report, Mr. Street and Mr. Smith, that you two did is so important, and not just with respect to it being updated on our website, but I was wondering, do we have kind of a master list where we send things to city and county managers? I really feel like they should get this, because I think it's important for them to, because we're kind of raising the flag on this, which is, we want you to pay attention, but also here's resources for you to consult, because we do have up and down our state these vulnerable coastal communities where, as in Imperial Beach, but also some others where we have disproportionate impacts. Dr. Huckleberry?
We have multiple venues in which to push information out to local governments. So we'll explore all those and offer to give a presentation or to just provide the resources. So that's a great idea. It's one we also sort of were planning on after we gave this presentation to try to push that out. So we'll do that.
And then, Ms. Christie, it would be great if we could also send that out to the coastal counties legislative delegation, because I think, you know, one of the things that we do incredibly well is consolidate this information and translate it for the public. And I just want them to understand that this is something that we do. And to see us as a resource going forward, and of course, all the associated, you know, agencies, both state and federal, because I do know OPC does a lot of work on that, as well as others. So, Commissioner Eckerly, do you have a few comments? I think it would be great to hear.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chair. You took the words right out of my mouth. I was just going to offer to leverage any of Ocean Protection Council's resources and the Natural Resources Agency to get this information out to as many people as possible.
Thank you so much. Just so important. I know the commission's going to be talking about the impacts from this reality. I mean, you can't read the newspaper every single day. There's a new report about the warming oceans, about the rising seas, about the accelerated melting of the Arctic, you know, on and on. And we have seen the most just chaotic and destructive weather patterns in our country and our state this year thus far. And this is a harbinger, which of course is really scary because we are, as we've said so many times, at an inflection point. And so we can, you know, I had an old saying when I was a lobbyist, which is people pay me to give them advice, but they don't pay me to take it. And, you know, I kind of feel like this is one of those situations where the commission does such an excellent job of trying to get information out and trying to be seen as a partner and providing technical information, but we can get it out. We can't require that they act on it, but we'll do our job. So thank you very much to the staff. Excellent report. Okay,